I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I looked forward to summer vacation. And the coming back to school was kind of dreaded. But as an adult, I look forward to school starting again. Right? I think, I grew out of it. I think I need a vacation from summer. I mean, we have so many different events. I mean, and let me just be honest. I am glad that I don't have the hat and the uniform on because I wore that a whole lot the last couple of weeks. We had a fun time with VBS, but by the end of it, I was exhausted. Can you guys relate to that? That there were just so many things. I am glad that my daughter, like the 1 year that she played t-ball, decided she is not a t-ball girl because I would hate to be driving around all over the place. I mean, I play softball on Tuesday nights with the church league, and that's enough for me. I'm just like, okay, I think sometimes we get so busy, and we just keep going, and summer is one of those seasons where it never stops. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. Summer is there. I taught for the last several years, and so I had summers off. Okay, let me just be honest. Anyone who says teachers have summers off, do not say that around me because I will have to fight the urge to do that. Because that's not exactly the case. Isn't that right, teachers? Okay. But no, even with that where I wasn't, in a classroom all day, every day, there were so many other things going on, so much to do. It just got tiring. And so I want to talk about something that connects with that idea today. We're going to look at a portion of Scripture from the book of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah, if you guys want to go ahead and turn to it, we're looking at Isaiah chapter 40, verses 27 through 31. Isaiah is an interesting prophetic book. It's the longest prophetic book in the Bible, okay? It is also a book that's interesting because it is actually written to 3 distinct time periods. Okay? The first 39 chapters of Isaiah is written to the nation of Israel before they're taken into exile, and much of it is warning them to, hey, you guys need to shape up or you literally will ship out. And then the chapters 40 through 55, those chapters address the nation of Israel after they're already in exile, after, Jerusalem has fallen and they are taken into Babylon. And then the chapters 55 through 66, those chapters are addressed to Israel as they return from exile and the different situations they face there. And so when we come to the book of Isaiah, one of the things that we need to realize is we need to understand the context. My schooling and my focus in my education, one of the places it was focused was what's called socio-historical criticism, which is a big fancy word to say, know the history of the stuff you're looking at, okay? And so with this book, that's especially important because of how important the book is to Christianity. I don't know if you know this, but so you had the 4 Gospels were written in, the probably between 1670, they started with Brighton, but they were all written, right? And so you had the 4 Gospels, and the churches used these 4 Gospels. But the church also had a 5th Gospel, the book of Isaiah. The church looked at the book of Isaiah as a gospel in some ways because Isaiah in many ways clearly portrays the coming of Christ, clearly addresses many of the things and many of the things that Jesus would do are addressed in Isaiah. And so those people that would talk about the 5th gospel that Christianity used, apparently they didn't do their research if they think that's the Gospel of Thomas or some of these other things that were found a couple hundred years after, everything else was written. For the early church, you had Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then they looked at Isaiah. And so when you look at the Gospels themselves, Isaiah is quoted more than any other prophetic book. In fact, the only book quoted more in the Gospels than Isaiah is the book of Psalms. Okay? And so there's the book of Romans. So the book of Romans is considered the first complete theological treatise, like the first systematic theology for the church. I mean, Paul just puts it all out there. What it means to follow Christ, what the implications of that are. Well, Paul quotes Isaiah more than any other book except, again, Psalms. Isaiah is important, but I don't think it's important just because the church used it. I think that shows us that the church saw it as important in the early church. One of the reasons it's important is because we can relate to some of the situations that the people were dealing with. Now, we may say, well, we can't relate to everything about it. We can't relate to, all the things that go. You may say, well, Jared, we do not know what it's like for us to be threatened with, a nation coming in to attack us and take us into exile. But do you think we can relate to the idea that sometimes we've faced situations when we think everything we know about our life is being threatened? Can we relate to that? And we may say, well, Jared, we have never been taken from our country to another country and forced to stay there. We've never been in exile in that way. But have you ever felt exiled? Have you ever felt that, this place that I find myself in right now, that's not where I'm meant to be? Can you guys relate to that? Have you ever felt like maybe when you look around at the situations, like it's not supposed to be like that? Because I think I can. And I think, we may say, well, we don't know what it's like what the people of Israel felt when they came out of exile and they came back to Jerusalem. And the difficulties they had when they looked at Jerusalem and said, this isn't what it used to be. They had a hard road ahead of them. But I think we can all relate to the idea that the journey of faith is many times unexpected. It's many times hard and difficult. And we walk into situations at times and say, this isn't what I expected. Can we relate to that? Because that's some of the things that the book of Isaiah speaks to. It speaks to situations that are very difficult. It speaks to times that are there is celebration to be had, but it's not always the way we expect it. So I think we can relate to some of it, The book of Isaiah tells the history and the story of the people of Israel in a specific time period. But it does more than that, because it's our story too. It's the church's story. And each of those situations, each of those things I've talked about, we can all relate to those. That's why the book is so important. That's why it was used so much, I think. So let's turn to Isaiah chapter 40, starting at verse 27. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version, the Bible, that translation. Okay, this is what Isaiah says. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles, and they shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. When looking at this passage, it's important to remember the context. This passage was written to people in exile, people whose lives had totally changed. Everything they knew was gone. And Jerusalem had fallen. And there were a lot of questions that the people were asking, because they had this idea that, well, Jerusalem is the place where God decided his presence would be, where God would let his name rest, that Jerusalem was protected. And so they had this understanding that that would always be the case, that they were God's people and God protected his people. And so now they're wondering, well, we're God's people, even though they really weren't acting like God's people at the time. But they were God's people in their mind, and they didn't understand, well, why did this happen? And so one of the things that they bring up, that they've been asking this question or saying, well, God does not see us. God must not see what is happening, because why would he let his people, again, who are not acting like his people, go into exile? Why would he let his city, Jerusalem, be taken over? Why would he allow that to happen? And so they said, well, God must not see what's going on. And then they say, well, either that or maybe he's just disregarded us completely. This is the train of thought the people were having. They were wrestling with things. At this point, they were strangers in a strange land. They were in a place that they didn't know. They once had social positions. They once had wealth. They once had land. They once had all these different things. Because most of the people that were taken into exile were the, quote, important people. But all that stuff had been stripped away. They had been taken away. Their homes were now gone. So not only were they in a different place, not only were they far away from home, but Jerusalem was now a plain of desolation. It had been razed to the ground. They just tore everything down. The temple was destroyed. And they didn't understand that. I don't know about you, but I can relate to some of these questions that they're dealing with. Even though Isaiah makes it very clear, hey guys, this was your own doing. Now, I tried to warn you, but this is what happens when, this happened because you didn't listen. So the prophet in this passage, he reminds the people of who God is. In fact, this whole chapter is just Isaiah saying, okay, remember God? Well, this is who God is. This is what he's like. I think you've forgotten. Have you guys ever needed to be reminded of something? Have you guys, I had some friends growing up that they were from a well-to-do family, and they did some very stupid things. And so I remember there was a conversation that their dad had with him, at which point he says, don't you remember you're a so-and-so? Saying you're acting in a way that doesn't live out this reality. And so that's kind of what Isaiah is doing. He's saying, don't you remember who God is? Because the way you're acting, what's going on, you aren't acting like that's the case. They had forgotten who God was. And really, the trouble that they were in was because they had forgotten that, because they had forgotten who God was, and so they weren't really that concerned with following his commands, right? And when they weren't very concerned with following his commands, they started worshiping idols. And when they were doing that and kept forgetting and more about who God was, they instead of doing what God had wanted them to do and had created them for, they actually went and did the exact opposite. They'd forgotten who God was and rebelled against him because they didn't remember. And so we might look at this situation, we might look at the people of Israel and say, well, bad people of Israel. We might do that, right? But I wonder if we are brutally honest, if we look at our own lives as followers of Jesus, I wonder if we could honestly say that there are not times that we do the exact thing. That if people look at how we behave, how we act, how we treat other people, they would really question whether or not we know who God is and know what God has done for us. I wonder. So we can't really give them that hard of a time, but we can learn. And so the people had forgotten what God is, and the prophet is reminding them who God is. And in the end of this reminder, the end of the chapter coming up, the prophet essentially says, well, let's talk about the limits of God, because they were really struggling. They were like, well, God must have limits if he's let this happen. And he says that the Lord is the everlasting God. He's not a God today and not tomorrow. He's not, wasn't a God back here, right back here. No, he always is and always will be God. And he is in control, that he created the earth. He doesn't grow tired or weary like human beings. I mean, even youths, right? I work with youth, right? Even you guys get tired, right, Shaylee? You get tired, right? Yeah. So especially when we play kickball, I was exhausted from that. But no, so this idea that God's not tired. God knows what's going on. It's not like he's taking a snooze and is missing out on this big event that's happening. God knows what he's doing. He knows what has happened to the people of Israel and why. And so the prophet then tells them, not only does God not get tired, but God gives strength and power and renewal to the helpless. People will become worried, but God doesn't. But God will actually help those who need it, help those who are weary. Supplies power to others. But the verse I will really want to focus on is verse 31. It says, but those who wait on the Lord for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like pretty good news. It sounds hopeful, right? I mean, for the people of Israel who were in exile, who had been taken away from their homes, who had gone from being on top of the world to now they're at the bottom rung of the social ladder in Babylon as exiles. They went from giving orders to now they're taking orders. They're tired. They don't understand why this is happening, even though they're told over and over again, this is why it's happening. They're not at their home. They don't have power or strength. They become everything. This passage says that, they were weak, they were faint, they needed strength. And so God tells them, well, I will give that to you. If you will wait on me, I will provide that for you. That's good news for them. That's hope that God is going to provide for us. God is going to help us. God is going to renew us if they wait on him. Now, like I said, last week, VBS, I was tired at the end of that. It was great. We had all these kids, a lot of things happening. But at the end, man, Monday morning came. It was hard to get out of bed. But we had this great event, so we could point to something like it was worth it. I have had times when I have poured everything I am into something, poured my heart and soul, spent countless hours on working on something only to be done, and instead of feeling accomplished, felt exhausted. Have you guys ever been there? Or maybe you've done something and you thought it was going to be great, and someone who you were doing it with or for looks at it and says, What? It's just no big deal. Or you really didn't do this right. Have you ever felt that? I have. And that's hard. And I think, the people of Israel were probably feeling something similar to that, even though they were misguided. And so this is good news that God will grant strength and endurance to those who need it most. And then there's this line about those who wait upon the Lord will mount up in wings like eagles, right? Now, how many of you guys have seen maybe on Facebook, a Facebook meme with that scripture quoted, or maybe, a poster with that quoted, or a needle pointer or something with that part of the verse quoted, the idea that, that those who wait on the Lord will mount up on wings like eagles. How many of you guys seen that? I mean, that's many times that's what's focused on, because let's just be honest, that's a powerful image, right? The idea of soaring like an eagle, that's pretty cool. And so from looking at that and looking at this verse and reading it, we might think, that's the most important thing that God is saying here that God would do. That the most important thing is God is going to help his people who wait on him or rise up on wings like eagles. That's not the most important thing here, though. The most important thing, so this is Hebrew poetry. Most of Isaiah is written in Hebrew poetry. And so there are some things that they do in Hebrew poetry that matter. Sometimes the place something has as much to do with how important it is as how powerful the words are. And so what we've got here is in verse 31, we have a triplet where you have one line and then 3 lines after it, and those 3 lines after it are all connected to that first line. But when you've got that set up like that, it doesn't matter what's said. The most important thing is always the last thing said. It works differently than we might think, because that's how their brains worked. When they would write things, that's one of the ways that it would work. So there's a different way that this should be understood. So when we read this, really we should read it like this. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. Okay? We just see the text, but the way that's set up, the way that the Hebrew mind would have read that would be like that. That's the most important thing. This idea of walking and not fainting is the focus. And really, God is saying, this is the most important thing that I'm going to do for you that I'm talking about right here. Sometimes we get this idea that bigger is better, right? You know what I'm talking about? This idea that the more extreme something is, the better it is, right? But that's not the case. Because let's be honest, if something extreme was that important, wouldn't we try to do it all the time? Right? If it was like, this is important for us to do, we do it all the time. What happens when you do something all the time? Is it extreme anymore? So if that's the way things work, we'd be in this vicious cycle that we'd be doing these extreme things all the time. They'd get boring and they wouldn't be extreme anymore. And then we'd have to find these other extreme things to do, right? Kind of a vicious circle. Thank goodness that's not the way things work. Thank goodness that's not the way it should be. So a few weeks ago, on my day off, I took my daughters and my niece with my parents, and we went to Whitewater in Branson, Missouri. It's a water park that has a bunch of slides and stuff like that. And so we allowed the girls, Ruthie and Anna, my niece, because they were Heidi really can't ride any rides. We allowed them to pick rides, and we would go on the rides with them. And so Ruthie picked a ride. It was this slide. I forget what it was called, but essentially it was this slide that you picked up these mats, and then you walked up, I don't know how many stories, up to this slide. And at the top of the slide, there were 4 little slides put together. And the idea is from this height that I swear it must have been like 9 stories. It probably wasn't, but I felt that way. You would get on the mat and you would slide down this water slide, right? But this water slide wasn't one that it just, went straight. It was one of those ones that are kind of cute and has like a dip and you bump and you jump, right? And so as I'm on getting ready, and for some reason, going up all the stories of stairs took much less time than that what felt like half an hour between when I could see the slide and I was on the slide. So during that time, I was looking at it and I was reverting back to, or trying to remember my high school physics class and trying to say, okay, there is no possible way that my mass going down that slide could get enough momentum for me to hop over the side of that slide and fall, 8 stories to my death. Surely there's no possible way. I really wasn't that convincing of myself, but then when I got up closer, I saw that where the dips were, they were like, more larger guardrails and stuff like that. So I went down it. It was terrifying, and yes, you did actually lose contact with the slide. My dad and I, that kind of freaked both of us out after we were down there at the end. But it was fun and terrifying, but it was not something that I would want to fill my day with or my life with, okay? I was like, at one point, we were like, hey, let's do that again. And I'm like, hey, let's not, But Grandpa eventually went on it with her again. So that was one of the extreme things. Another extreme thing, they had this other ride that my niece wanted to ride, and I'm glad Ruthie didn't want to ride it. She had no interest in it, called the Kapow Plummet. Okay, yeah, you're laughing at the name because, that tells you something. So imagine a tube that is 245 feet long, and there is high pressure water running through this tube. And what they do is they take this tube and they attach it to the slide, the top of the slide, and there's like a 70-degree angle going down. And it goes down about 50 feet, and then it turns around, and then you come out, right? That's what you have with this thing, okay? And my niece wanted to ride it, and I'm like, okay, we can do this. And so when you get to the top, again, getting up there is really quick. And then the time when you get to see what actually happens when people go down the slide, you have a lot of time to think at that point. There is this pod, literally a pod that you step in, and the doors close. It's plexiglass, and so you can see out of it. But they close because apparently at that point they want to tell you, by the way, it is too late to take the walk of shame down the steps. You are going to take the 7.5-second route down, okay? And so there's 3, 2, and you're standing, and it's go 3, 2, 1, I guess to prepare you for what's going to happen, that the end is near, so you can say a prayer before you go down. And when one hits, the floor that you have been so steadily standing on drops out, and you drop down in this tunnel that you could see light but nothing else, and you have water shooting up your nose and everything, and you're flying down, and at the end, 7 seconds later, you're down and you're like in a pool of water, right? Let's just say that's not something that I feel the need to do anytime soon again. If ever again, I do not feel the need to do that. But these were extreme things. And let's just be honest, the only reason I did them is because of the kids. But the thing is, those extreme rides that we did that day, those were not the most important things. They were not the things that are going to have lasting impact. Yeah, you know what? My niece may remember that time that Uncle Jared, who, after going through that ride, is the best uncle ever after riding that ride, okay, with her. She may remember that, but the more important thing was the time that I spent with them. The time that we spent going there and spending that time together as a family. That is what's important. That is what's going to have lasting impact. The mundane things that we do in our lives, the majority of the time, they're going to have a more lasting impact than whatever, extreme things that we may do once in a lifetime. The majority of the time, that's the case. Mundane consistencies are more important than extreme exemptions, okay? Let me repeat that. Mundane consistencies are more important than extreme exemptions. And what I mean by that is that the things that we do every day that are boring, that we do consistently, day after day, are going to have a lot more impact than the things that we do once in a lifetime. That are really, let's just be honest, me going on those rides, kind of out of character, some of them. As I've gotten older, I hate heights. And so both of those rides were much higher in the air than I really wanted to be. Okay? So those were the extreme exemptions. But the consistencies, or the time that we spent together, that's what's important. Okay? That's what's going to have lasting impact. And I think that, the idea is, even if we have extreme exemptions that do have a lasting impact, the reason that they have an impact is because they change the everyday things that we do. They change how we operate on an everyday level. Okay? So I'd still say those mundane things are important. So you say, what does this have to do with the scripture? What does this have to do with what Isaiah was saying? I think part of what he's saying is God is saying that, yes, there are going to be some times when you feel like you are soaring on top of the world. There are going to be sometimes you're so excited you're going to be running. But and God will be with us in those times. But the majority of time that we are here on earth, it's going to feel like we're walking. The everyday things that we do matter. And God says, I will be with you in those. And let's just be honest, the idea of walking, what is more mundane than walking, right? There's nothing extreme about it. And so when God says, you will walk and not faint, because of the strength that he's going to give us, he's saying, I'm going to be right there with you. I'm going to support you in the everyday, mundane consistencies of your life. Let's just be honest, the majority of us do not fly every day, right? Okay, the majority of us don't run every day. Now, if you're athletic, or apparently if you are a 2-year-old girl, you run all the time. But unless you're chasing after that 2-year-old girl on a regular basis, you do not run all the time, right? But we all walk all the time. We have to get out of bed and walk to get ready. We have to walk to our cars to get in them to drive to work. We have to walk from our cars to wherever we're working, right? Everyone walks. It's something that we do every day. It is a mundane thing. But the idea of walking, that metaphor, that image of walking is very important in the Bible, because the way one walks is understood as that's the way you live your life. That's how you live every day. And so whenever you see the Bible talk about a path or walking, it's much larger than me just simply do. It's about this is about living life. This is about the everyday things that we do. And so the life of faith is a journey. And there will be times when we feel like we're soaring. There will be times that we feel like we are running. But the majority of the time we're going to be walking. And let's just be honest, sometimes we're going to be walking in a stumble or walking begrudgingly, right? Or a trudge. Have you ever heard of trudging? The definition of trudging is walking slowly with heavy steps, typically because of exhaustion or harsh conditions. That's kind of the walk of a pilgrim after they've gone on a long trek. Sometimes we're going to be walking like that, but we're walking. And God tells us that he will be with us and he will give us strength so that we can make it. It's this image that he's telling the people of Israel who are in Babylon. He's telling us that, you know what? Yeah, your situation might be hard right now, but I'm with you. It's like, God's saying, you can do this. You can make it. I'm right there with you. You're not alone. Just one more step. Just one step in front of the other. Just keep on going. So have you guys ever seen Finding Nemo? Okay, Sherry, she works with a lot of students, and one of the things to keep her motivated is she has a picture of a character from Finding Nemo called Dory on her bulletin board. And you may say, well, why does she have a cartoon character? How does that give her inspiration? Well, in the movie Finding Nemo, at one point, Dory has this little chant. It's just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And so she actually tells her students the story of that, and is like, hey, you know what? Sometimes you just need to take one step in front of another. You just need to do the very next thing. You just need to keep swimming, you know. And I think that's the idea of the journey of faith, that God is saying, just keep walking. Just keep going. I am with you when you soar. I am with you when you run, but I am especially with you when you walk, when you feel like you can't take another step. I will give you strength. You can make it. That's what God is saying right here. And that's great news. I mean, the people of Israel, that's good news for them because they were struggling. That's good news for us when we struggled and we realize God is right there with us. And let me tell you, there are many more times I need that reassurance when I'm walking. Because let's just be honest, I don't like to run a whole bunch. And I really don't like heights, so you're not going to see me, let's soar, But I do a lot of walking, right, in my journey of faith. And sometimes you need more encouragement. You need to know that God is with you more in that than any other time. Who here is tired? Yeah. Hey, it's let's just be honest. I live that way right now, right? Because I have a 2-year-old who, Sherry can attest to, she doesn't stop. Like, I think she's got a Fitbit that tracks how many steps she took. I think she put that Fitbit on Heidi for like 5 minutes, and she must have walked or ran 100 steps or something by that point, right? I mean, it was crazy. So it probably wasn't 1,000, but it was a whole bunch. So, I keep going. And sometimes, we are in that trudge. Another definition of a trudge is from the movie A Knight's Tale, is that slow, weary, depressing, yet determined walk of a person who has nothing left in their life except the impulse to soldier on. Have you ever felt like that? Because let me tell you, I can relate to that. And God is saying, when you feel like that, when you're going through that, I'm right there with you. And I'm telling you, you can do it one step in front of another. He says, those that wait on God will be renewed. I wonder how many times we feel exhausted, we feel tired because of the things that we have chosen to expend our energy on. I wonder how many times that we do things that if God would look at it and just speak to us and tell us straight out, he would say, those things aren't the things I would spend time on. I wonder how much that affects us more than anything else. Because, we have this idea of waiting, right? That it's just me sitting here twiddling my thumbs or just sitting around doing nothing, right? Biding time. But that's not what is being talked about here in this passage, because that's not how the Hebrew mind would have understood it when they heard it. When we look at this idea of waiting, there are two things that are implied. Number one, a complete dependence on God. And number two, just as important, is a willingness to submit to God deciding the terms of our waiting and following him. Now, there may be times that we can say, I am completely dependent on God. Let me tell you that second part, that's a little bit harder, right? Say, you know what? God is in charge of my situation. He's in charge of deciding the terms of my waiting and follow him. I will listen to him no matter what. Especially when things get difficult. Especially when we feel like we've been trudging a while. Waiting and hoping, which, in different translations, it's translated either waiting or hoping. And those two ideas, the reason it's translated differently is because in a lot of ways that Hebrew word is connected to both of them. We have this thing in the English language, I think sometimes dissect things out, and so words aren't as powerful as they are necessarily in older languages. So waiting and hoping is connected to this idea of more than just sitting there. It's this idea that when we wait and we hope, there are things that we should be doing. There are things that we are called to. We're to operate differently. We should be following after God, doing what God has told us to. There's appropriate behavior. So the idea of waiting is that we are faithful in the meantime. And we are especially faithful in the mean times. Because that's important, because that's what the people of Israel were facing. And sometimes it's hard, because the idea that God will give us strength and renew us. We also have a misconception of that it means that God will wave a magic wand and everything will go back to the way it was. And I think some of the people of Israel had that idea. And when they returned from exile, they had a rude awakening. But God was still with them. God was with them and he was helping them. But that did not mean that God gave them nor gives us uninterrupted prosperity. In fact, when you're honest, when we read Scripture, God says, you know what? You're going to face hard times. You're going to face those mean times. But we can face them because we know God is walking with us. Perhaps you're here today and you say, well, Jared, I have been waiting and walking on my journey of faith for some time. And I want to run and I want to soar. All that walking, that's fine, but I just wish I had more of those times that we're running and soaring. I want to say a couple things to you. First of all, I want to thank you for your faithfulness. I want to thank you for your willingness to wait and walk on your journey of faith. But I want to also tell you something else. See, I grew up in the church. And I have seen amazing times filled with all sorts of activity. I've seen times when the church just pulled out all the stops and did these great events and did all of this stuff. And during those events, there are some exceptional results. But the thing is, you can't continue at the pace. And you can't continue at that intensity. And honestly, while there are things that I remember from some of those times, those extreme times, they're not near as impactful as some other things. Because what has impacted my journey of faith are those mundane consistency. Bessie Sigmund, all of her adult life, taught children's Sunday school. And then she also assisted with a boys' after-school program on Wednesdays. She was my Sunday school teacher. When she was my Sunday school teacher and my RA leader, she was in her 70s. Okay? All of her adult life, she had been doing this, and she was just consistent. And you know what? That had an effect. I mean, let's just be honest. How many fourth graders can say, this was my Sunday school teacher, and know them by name, picture them in today's age? Not that many, but I can because of the impact that Bessie had on me. Or how about, let's see, Jan Lippert, who ran the clown program at our church and worked with youth and children in doing ministry, spent countless hours with them, gave up weekends, went on mission trips with them. I remember John and Cameron, who they were the Bible drill leaders at my church that also worked with us countless hours, gave up weekends to go to competitions and just be there with us. I remember Jeannie Dixon and Anita Hood, who served teaching youth Sunday school, but also directing a youth choir. Okay, they gave up their time and dealt with, let's just be honest, I was a frustrating teenager, and my friends were frustrating teenagers, especially guys. Sherry can attest to the ones she's met. But these people, they cared enough that consistently they were there. And they were there, and they were there waiting upon the Lord and walking with me and sometimes dragging me along. Those people had a greater impact on my life than any events, any times of soaring or running, because of their willingness, because of their example. The majority of time, they walked. And so the majority of our faith is about walking. and it's about being faithful. And the impact that you will have as you are waiting upon the Lord, as you're doing what God has instructed us to do, as you're loving people and loving God, you may not see it. You may not see, well, I've not had that much of an impact. But I can attest to the fact that you have, because I can look at my life, and it was the people that were consistent in the mundane things that had an impact on me. So but perhaps here today you don't know Christ. Perhaps you don't have a relationship with Jesus. Perhaps you're tired too. Let me tell you, the first step in waiting on the Lord is coming to know Jesus, having that personal relationship with Jesus, receiving him as your Lord and Savior. Jesus said in Matthew 11, 28 through 31, "Come to me, all who labor and are of heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus also tells us to come to him, to depend on him. He will be there with us. He wants to help us and encourage us. So if you don't know Christ today as Sheila and whoever comes up, as we sing this last song, you can come today. I'll be up here. I'll talk with you. If you were just, maybe you've been on that journey of faith and you are walking and you just need some encouragement, I encourage you to come and pray at the altar today. Maybe you're someone who is a follower of Jesus, but you realize that, man, the reason I'm tired is because I'm spending a lot of time and effort on things that may not be worth that. I encourage you to come and pray and pray to God about those things and say, are there things in my life that I need to just say, okay, that's not something we're going to worry about. God wants us to be encouraged. God wants us to be renewed. And sometimes we make it more complicated than he wants to. So today as they sing, we'll just open up the altars for prayer.